Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman here, as always, with Tom or Tom. How's it going?
Oh, Tony, we get to watch a football game pretty darn soon at this point. I'm looking forward to it. I'm thinking this is, the closer we get to this game, the more I think this could be a really good, close, potentially dramatic football game.
Potentially dramatic, a good mix of styles, talent, offenses, defenses, and it's going to be the first time we've gotten to see Ohio State since the Michigan game. New quarterback, a bunch of familiar faces, so that'll be interesting as well, as it seems like a bunch of guys are opting in. So this episode today is us talking about, we went and rewatched Missouri versus LSU. And that was an LSU 49-39 win for Missouri. A game that Missouri led in the second quarter, 22-7, maybe late in the first quarter, 22-7, and let it slip away. And so let's go back and forth talking about what we saw, what caught our eye in that. And we did this for the Georgia game last year. I think we went back. Did we watch like four or five?
Yeah, we watched at least 4 games last year, including the Missouri game.
Yeah.
Which was, what was so interesting was this year's Missouri-LSU game, just sort of in terms of flow, was kind of similar to last year's Missouri-Georgia game, where Missouri was in front, and it felt like, oh man, they, like, even watching, knowing the result later, was like, oh man, they're going to win this game. How are they going to beat Georgia? This is crazy. And then they had opportunities to kind of stretch the lead, put the game away, and didn't take advantage of it. This game against LSU was kind of similar in a lot of ways.
Yeah, so let's go back and forth. And I think the first thing that I will discuss is quarterback Brady Cook is pretty good and good for what they do, but he had some issues, like all quarterbacks, when he got pressured. Threw 2 interceptions against LSU. He would kind of get off schedule a little bit and throw some flat-footed throws in there. And I think for Ohio State, getting pressure on him quickly will pay off throughout the game. It doesn't just have to be a one-off thing where, or like you have to get after him consistently. I think if you get after him enough early on, you will be able to keep him thinking about stuff coming on after that. But I just, when they were up so big and not knowing the final score, but not knowing how it happened, you knew there were going to be some bad plays by the quarterback in there, and so it was interesting to watch and wait for those and see. And this looks like this looks like it's going to happen here because he's being pressured. So I think if Ohio State obviously gets pressure after him, he's going to potentially throw some balls to the defense.
Yeah, he seems like his game, and my first note was about him as well, and the fact that he's a pretty good runner.
Yep.
He doesn't look like Michael Vick, but he's sort of in a better runner than Talia Tagovailoa, maybe in the same sort of vein as like a J.J. McCarthy, where he's not going to run for 200 yards on you, but man, he's going to pick up some third downs, and you're going to see shots of the defense, the coaches on the sideline shaking their heads, and the defensive guys in the field kind of just like looking up at the ceiling and just annoyance. He's a lot like Talia Tagovailoa and J.J. McCarthy in certain ways, where can use his legs to pick up first downs, can use his legs to extend plays, buy his receivers time, move the ball down the field. Not an incredible deep arm or anything like that, but pretty efficient. But you can get him to make mistakes too, as we've seen from McCarthy and Tagovailoa over the years. He's the kind of quarterback who he's going to make annoying plays, but he's going to make annoying plays for both teams. He's going to make plays that are really annoying for the opposing team, which is like, oh, how did we give up a 3rd and 8 to this guy? And he's going to make plays that are annoying for Missouri as well, where it's like, why did you throw that ball? One of the interceptions in this game was when the game was really in a desperate final minute kind of situation. He threw a pick 6 with like 45 seconds left, and they had no timeouts and were backed up to their own 10-yard line or something like that. So, one of them was a little bit excusable, where it's a desperate situation and you got to get the ball out. But he's not mistake prone, but he's not mistake averse either.
Yeah, he had an interception in the second quarter, and it was a bad drive for him. He had 2 bad throws on that same drive, and it was just interesting to see. That was when some pressure got to him, and he answered a bad throw with an even worse throw. But you mentioned the running. He was sacked twice. 5 yards, 9 yards, 5 carries for 9 yards. 2 of those were sacks, but he pulled one, pulled it on a read for a 16-yard gain, and he showed you have to be aware of him, and he's a guy that can rush, run for, put up 50 yards on the ground, and just be another option on the ground for them. So Ohio State will need to be aware of that. I think the other thing that I noticed about him is he does not have a big arm. He will throw it downfield, but it's a lot of timing stuff, and it's anticipation. I don't want to say Drew Brees, but how some guys have to rely on other things other than just zipping it down. He does not have a huge arm, so it gives the defense time to get to the ball, but he's also a pretty quick throw. Like I said, the anticipation is there. The ball is there as receivers are getting ready for it. It hits them in a good time, hits them in stride. But in terms of corking one 60 yards down the field, that's not really a thing that's going to happen.
No, he's not Joe Milton, and that is both a good thing and a bad thing depending on what you need on any individual play. I think that's also going to change a little bit how Ohio State is going to rush him, because I talked to Ty Hamilton about that a little bit, where when you've got a quarterback who can run, you can't just go all out and pin your ears back, as people say probably too often.
Never heard that.
That's you have to kind of stay in your lanes. You have to kind of contain him. You have to kind of box him in, keep him in the pocket. I think they're going to try and keep him in the pocket, get hands up. So this may not be a game, and Ohio State has not had huge sack numbers this year regardless, but the strategy, I think, from Ohio State's end is going to be more keep him in the pocket, try and get pressure there, but don't get behind the quarterback. You've seen that where the rushes a little too aggressively, and the quarterback can step up and kind of get out. You got to be careful of that. So I think that's going to change how Ohio State rushes and maybe makes the rush a little more conservative from the Buckeyes' end.
Yeah, there has to be a secondary plan for those things when he gets out of the pocket. There also needs to be a plan for all of the motion that Missouri does. And we talked to Jim Knowles earlier in the week, and we talked to them before a couple weeks ago about Missouri's offense, and he's like, they're talking about all of the motion that they do. Ryan Day talked about it, and then you watch it, and you're like, holy cow, they do a lot of motion and movement and moving guys, and we right away there's a two-back set. It's like, oh, cool, two-back set, and one of those backs is Mookie Cooper. Another time it's Luther Burden. So they'll put the receivers in the backfield, motion them out, get them on linebackers. I'm sure there's some wheel routes that they've done from that in the past, but they move guys everywhere, and they'll a slot will just kick out even further. They always have movement. They're moving defenders around, getting the matchup they want. And then we can talk about Luther Burden specifically in a little bit, but they just move everybody all over the place, and you have to be aware of where everybody is, who you're most concerned about, and that probably is Luther Burden, but they are very mobile.
Yeah, they use motion a lot. I always think of Matt Canada offenses in terms of using a lot of motion, and what that does is it allows you, number one, you can use motion to get guys in a specific matchup, like you said. The other thing is sometimes that can be a tip-off in terms of what kind of coverage, or you're sort of narrowing down the coverage that the opposing team is. If you're running a guy across the formation and there's not someone else trailing him, well, maybe that's more likely to be a zone than a man or something like that. So you can use that to sort of identify things as well. But that's sort of related to a move that they made this year, which was taking Luther Burden from outside, where he's kind of built like an outside receiver. He's not a slot receiver in the Ohio State kind of mold. You would look at the wide receivers, and Mookie Cooper is several inches shorter than both Theo Weiss and Luther Burden. So you go, oh, he's the slot guy. No, Luther Burden's the slot guy. And the reason they moved Luther Burden into the slot, I talked to Brady Cook about this, and he said, that has been really big for them this year. There was a graphic on the LSU game that was, I think he was in the slot 5% or 7% of snaps last year, and as of the LSU game, it was 73% of snaps. So, this is a really dramatic shift for them. And the reason is, you get him in the slot, then typically your best cover guys are going to be your outside corners. They're going to be a little bit taller. They're going to be your better cover guys. Those are the guys who are going to typically get challenged downfield, and the guys in the slot is typically sort of the short area game, and it's just sort of quickness and you typically have a shorter guy as your slot corner, he's a mismatch in the slot. And Brady Cook said very simply, it just makes it easier to get him the ball.
Yep.
And so they get him the ball a lot in the slot. And, he's the kind of guy where he can do stuff in that short area, but he can also, if you get him in the matchup against the right guy, you don't have to just run a little 7-yard slant or something like that in the slot. You don't have to run a little crosser. You can do whatever you want there. So it sort of opens up a lot of opportunities for them and a lot of options for them in the passing game. So that's Luther Burden is number 3. He is definitely going to be a player Ohio State fans are going to need to keep a close eye on. He's someone who was a recruit. We've talked about this a couple times this week, but was recruited by Brian Hartline, a 5-star receiver who Brian Hartline had really made a push for, and out of St. Louis, which is an area that Brian Hartline and the Buckeyes have had some success pulling some talented wide receivers and other skill players like Ezekiel Elliott in the past. And he ended up deciding to stay home at Missouri. Brian Hartline doesn't miss all that often, but, and when you watch him, it's like, oh, yeah, I could see him being quite successful in playing for Brian Hartline.
Yeah, moving him to the slot reminds me of when Ohio State did that with Garrett Wilson. Talking to Kevin Wilson about why he did it, Kevin Wilson talked about his time at Oklahoma when they had Ryan Broyles talking about his 131 receptions in 2010. And then it's like, oh boy, if you're going to be throwing the ball to Garrett Wilson that much, that's going to be pretty spectacular. Of course, it didn't end up being that much because you also had other guys on that roster. But the move, and it's a premier position at Ohio State as well. I mean, you for the last decade plus, it's very rare that an outside receiver has led Ohio State in receptions until Marvin Harrison, although Marvin Harrison played more in the slot this year than ever before.
For all of the same reasons we just talked about.
Exactly. And so that's watch number 3. He's tough after the catch. Jim Knowles was asked, so what's the best way to contain him? And he said, as soon as he gets the ball, you need to be tackling him. And if you can tackle him a little bit before that, go ahead. But you can't let him get loose because he is explosive. He's obviously crafty, and he has gotten better and better in the slot. He's more comfortable in it. I asked Luther Burden, what is your favorite spot to line up? Because, like I said, we saw him in the backfield, we saw him out wide, saw him in the slot. He's like, wherever. And I'm like, well, where are you most effective? He's like, the slot.
Yeah.
And it's clear, bearing out the season, 83 catches, I think 1,197 yards, only 8 touchdowns though, which do better. I guess, right?
Well, I'm sure he's going to try this weekend. I did want to talk a little bit about Cody Schrader, who's the starting running back for Missouri. He has, one of those great college football stories. He started at Division II Truman State and came to Missouri as a walk-on. He played a couple of years at Truman State, and then which is Division II, played there from 2018 to 2021, and then came to Missouri as a walk-on. And this is one of these betting on yourself kind of situations where D2 to the SEC, that is going from JV level or varsity level to Heisman level on your video game. That is not a one level jump there. And last year he was okay. He 745 yards, 4.4 yards a carry, 9 touchdowns. This year, 1,499 yards, 6.1 yards a carry, 13 touchdowns, and he's got a burst. He had a touchdown run of 20-something yards against LSU, and it was like he's quick. So he's someone who, first of all, it's a cool story, and I don't know how much Missouri games Ohio State fans have watched this year, because it's not one of those teams that was necessarily on anyone's radar, and that's not necessarily viewed as a huge game. And as we're watching the Missouri LSU game, you're getting updates from the studio on the Ohio State Maryland game. So, this was definitely not a game Ohio State fans were watching live. So, but I think Cody Schrader is, number one, a very cool story, just, one of those great college football stories, but also, number two, a pretty darn good college football player and someone who has enough of a burst. Ohio State's been pretty darn good not allowing big plays and keeping opposing running backs contained. But Cody Schrader could be someone who puts up 75 yards and a touchdown or something like that.
Averaging like 125 yards per game, which well beyond the lead in the SEC. Touchdowns, 9 straight games. His last 6 games, here are his carry totals: 20, 26, 22, 35, 23, 27. So we talk about Luther Burden, but this right here might be your MVP. He keeps him on schedule. He is somebody that is reliable, and just you can just give him the ball, and what Ryan Day would talk about, where you just the guys that get the extra yard, the couple extra yards, he does that for them, and just keep an eye on him. He'll be one to watch, obviously, as well. I mentioned this to you before earlier in the day. When we watched Georgia, the defensive standouts, like you could go into that, you could go into any game against Georgia and not know who their defenders were, but by the end of the game, you're going to know a few of them, and they're going to stand out because they're repetitive. They keep making plays. In this one, I kind of waited for that to happen for Missouri, and it didn't really. I didn't know, and I didn't notice that not one guy continued to stand out. I will say that two of their starting linebackers that played in that game will not be playing in this game due to injury. But I don't know. Nobody really jumped out to me on defense, and maybe I should have been paying closer attention. But
well, and this was a game where they gave up 49 points, so this might not be the best game. They did have two guys who were first-team All-SEC, Darius Robinson, the defensive lineman, and Chris Abrams-Drain in the defensive backfield. And they had a couple guys on the second team as well on the defense. Tyron Hopper, the linebacker, and
Hopper is out.
Hopper is out for this game. I'm with you though, where you didn't see a lot of impact plays in that game. And again, that's not the best game.
Jayden Daniels is pretty good.
Jayden Daniels is pretty good. The announcers on the game were sort of lobbying for him in terms of the Heisman a little bit. I'm like, you may have a point. I sort of see where you're coming from there.
And he got hurt in that game and still came back and lit him up.
Yeah, and he was interesting to watch because he created so many problems with his legs where he was just the burst he has and just, they're running him into just a light box when Missouri was sort of looking past. You wonder if that's something Ohio State may have some success with, because this is going to be a very different Ohio State offense with Devin Brown instead of Kyle McCord.
Yep.
Now, I don't want to lead anyone to believe that Devin Brown is Jayden Daniels. He is not. The burst is not. Devin Brown is much more of a between the tackles, move the pile, 4th and 1 goal line push kind of guy, rather than a get outside, burst, electric, 60-yard run. That's not really what his game is. But, you looked at some of the stuff LSU was doing in terms of having that quarterback run, and you could sort of say, this might not go for 30 yards, but it might go for 12 or something like that, and you pick up a first down. And so, and if you have to do that, if you're able to do that, then Missouri can't sit with a real light box and drop a bunch of guys, and then you've got to allocate, everyone just sort of, why don't you put a spy on them?
Right.
That's sort of the generic term for it. But, you might have to allocate another body in the box, which then opens things up potentially downfield.
Yeah, and Jayden Daniels in this game, 15 of 21 passing, 259 yards, 3 touchdowns, 2 sacks, but carried the ball 15 times for 130 yards. 2 of those were sacks, but basically 13 for 145 with a 35-yard long. And not all of these are called runs. These are some scrambles in there. So with the way LSU spread out this Missouri defense, it allowed for some running lanes for Jayden Daniels. So no, Devin Brown isn't Jayden Daniels, but there will be running lanes the way Ohio State can spread them out if they choose to. And then you can take advantage of that. Maybe if that, I don't know how many reads you're going to want him to go. Like after 2, then take off if it's something like that.
Probably.
Because there is no Marvin, most likely.
Yeah.
So you don't have to just wait for Marvin to get open. You don't have that. So it might be a 1-2 go type of thing. But looking at some of these numbers, Brady Cook was 30 of 47, 17 targets to Luther Burden, 11 catches, 149 yards, 85 yards after the catch.
Yeah.
So that's when Jim Knowles says, tackle him as soon as he gets the ball. If you do that, that's 11 catches for, say, 70 yards.
Yeah.
Instead of...
And if you hold him to 11 catches for 70 yards...
That's a win.
That's a win because you're not going to throw 11 passes. You're going to throw 15, 16 passes. Yeah. So then 16 passes are going for 70 yards. That's like less than 5 yards an attempt. If you're giving up less than 5 yards an attempt, unless you're -3 in turnovers, you're winning that game.
Yeah, and 47 throws is a lot. And this really wasn't a situation where Missouri had to throw because they were behind. They had the ball with 5:40 to go, or with under 5 minutes basically, and it was a one-score game. So they weren't throwing to catch up. They were always in it, and in fact led until midway through the fourth quarter in this one for Missouri. Or LSU took the lead. It was a really good back and forth game once LSU caught up from that 22-7 lead. I think we mentioned this in the bold prediction show, but in terms of Missouri scoring right away, I think maybe their first drive, but then going for two right away.
Yep.
And so that will be something to watch. As soon as I saw that, I was like, well, they're definitely doing that against Ohio State. There's definitely going to be a two-pointer in there somewhere because you've had all of this time. Mm-hmm. You're like, we're going to swing for the fences. We're going to do things to make life difficult for Ohio State. Let's just create a little bit of chaos. Let's go for two. We don't get it. We can always get it back.
Well, and what's interesting is when you think about that, going down the field, you score a touchdown, you go for two to get to 8 off the first drive. Who's the first person you think of when you think that? Chip Kelly, right? Chip Kelly, Oregon. Who's Ryan Day's mentor in college football? Chip Kelly. I mean, this is something that Ryan Day is going to be familiar with. But this is exactly the kind of situation where this is a little bit of a kitchen sink game for Missouri, where for Ohio State it is what it is, and if they win the Cotton Bowl, everyone will be happy for 24 hours and then go back to being upset about the Michigan game. For Missouri, if they win this game, it's 11 wins. It's a New Year's 6 win. It's a New Year's 6 win over a really prestigious national program. It's a win over a top 10 team for the first time since what did you say,
2013?
Yeah, I mean this is a really this is one that goes in the high on the list of great wins in Missouri history if they get it.
It's good for recruiting.
Oh yeah, I mean this is potentially a huge game for Missouri. So this is you're going to throw everything you got into it kind of game for them. Speaking of special teams, the guy who they're taking off the field when they go for two is Harrison Mevis, who is their place kicker, who has a leg and a half. He kicked a 61-yarder against Kansas State, which is good. RG3, the announcer, was calling him the thicker kicker.
Yes.
Because he is, if you remember, like Penn State had one a couple of years ago. Wisconsin has had one a few times. I prefer place thicker, but that's just me. That's, your mileage may vary there. But the interesting thing about him is he's got this huge leg, which is great. That's good. You would love a kicker who can make it from 60 yards. So especially indoors, perfect conditions. He, that field goal range line is going to be pretty darn far out on the field on your TV when Missouri has the ball. But what's interesting is you look at, right before halftime in this game, they had a 2-minute drill and they got the ball with like 2 minutes left on the clock, and they might have had a timeout, and they got it on the their own 20 to 25, something like that maybe, and they were very conservative with the ball. Really didn't make much of a push, and it was just kind of very deliberate and like, well, if we get there, we get there, but we're not that worried about it. You got a veteran quarterback. He had been playing fine to that point. You got talented wide receivers. You should trust him to just kind of 10-yard out, 15-yard, just boom, 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 march you down the field, be methodical about it. They were just not. They were very passive about it, and I don't know how much of that was game state and they had the lead at that point, and how much of that was, and they didn't feel, it was just don't make a mistake.
Yep.
Or how much of that was, well, we have a kicker who can make it from 61 yards, so do we need to rush it, hurry down the field? Not really. It feels like maybe this is not something that you worry about for this game because they're going to throw everything they have at it, but having that great kicker can lead you to be a little bit more passive at times too.
Yeah, it definitely can. Like when you're in playing overtime and the team in the top of the inning doesn't score, so all you need is a field goal, and then you start playing for a field goal. You end up having to kick like a 52-yarder because you're just too conservative. But yeah, they settled for a 50-yarder and he made it. But also Missouri was getting the ball out of the third quarter, so maybe that also had something to do with it. My last thing is Missouri did have some good goal line stands in this one. Not completely.
Sure, yes.
They were able to stop LSU entirely, and there were some penalties involved where LSU was getting several cracks at it. But they would stop them like 3 times, and there'd be a penalty, and they'd have to stop them another 3. So they they probably stopped them on 85%
Yeah.
of those
Yeah.
plays. So that was impressive. They did as best as they could until they just couldn't do it anymore.
My favorite stat from this game was what was at one point where Missouri had 3 penalties for 3 yards
Yes.
because they kept committing penalties when they were backed up, backed up to the goal line. And what's interesting about this is, good goal line defense. This is finally, Ohio State fans finally have the quarterback who they're probably going to be willing to line up under center and just shove into the end zone. And now you're playing against a team that it looks like it's probably kind of hard to do that against. So, I think you would look at Devin Brown and go, aha, finally they can do this. That may be a little bit of a not so fast, my friend, where if the interior of Missouri's defensive line is pretty stout, and it sure looked like it against LSU, and the interior of Ohio State's offensive line has not been a strength necessarily this season, that may not be quite as much of a given as you think. So maybe that means you're running. We've seen Devin Brown run sort of off tackle stuff in that goal line package they had him in against Penn State and Purdue in the past, but that may not be quite as much of a gimme as you might think with, oh, good, we've got the running guy in now.
Well, and that kind of goes back to, you mentioned all SEC defensive tackle Darius Robinson, who was in there. 12 tackles for loss this season, 7.5 sacks, 41 tackles. He's an active guy, and of course, defensive tackles kind of unsung a lot and just clog them up, and you don't necessarily see their numbers a lot of times, but clearly I think had some impact in that game, and I better check his stat line just to make sure that he actually played. He did. He played. Impact, he did not play, but no. Just a solid showing from that entire defensive line throughout portions of that game.
Yeah, and they are not the only team to give up yardage on the ground to LSU, especially to Jayden Daniels this year, and they're not the only team to give up yards through the air to Jayden Daniels this year. But, this is going to be much in the same way we've talked about this being the best wide receiver unit that Ohio State is going to be facing this year, probably. This is almost certainly going to be the best wide receiver unit that Missouri is going to be facing this year. What is you've with the running back talent with Travion Henderson playing, there's a lot that's going to hinge on Devin Brown. If Devin Brown has a good game, Devin Brown has the opportunity to put up some points on this Missouri defense. But but this is a good enough Missouri defense that it's not going to be a walkover. You're going to have to. You're not just going to be able to run over this team, for 400 yards with Travion Henderson. This is going to be a little bit more of a challenge, and you're going to have to be multiple. You're going to have to be two-dimensional in this. You cannot just run. You're not going to just be able to dink and dunk. You're going to have to be able to throw the ball downfield. It's going to probably be there for Ohio State. It's just a matter of can Ohio State execute it and get it there.
Yep, it's the pitching and the catching. I do think one of my last note was that Travion Henderson will have some room to run. There was some room to run. You spread this defense out, and you can make some things happen, like any defense. But I'm really looking forward to this game. I know initially everybody was like, when it gets announced, you're like, but the more you look at Missouri, I think there's a ton of interesting things. The more you look at Ohio State, this is the start of next season. So I think that alone gives you something to watch. Do you have anything else?
No, I'm through my list, but yeah, I'm right there with you. I think this is a game that the more I look at these two teams, I'm like, this is a really interesting matchup of two teams because there's not necessarily the one. The best unit on the team on the field is probably Ohio State's defense, but. I think you would, if you looked at Ohio State's offense, if you look at the advanced statistical systems, a lot of them are going to tell you Ohio State has an advantage in all 4 potential phases. Well, that doesn't account for Marvin Harrison isn't playing. There's a different quarterback. How is that quarterback going to do? Shrug emoji. We will find out together on Friday night. Might be great, might be not great.
Yep.
We'll find out, but this is going to be a good test. Brady Cook talked about this. Missouri's quarterback talked about, they're looking forward to playing a full-strength Ohio State team without a lot of opt-outs because it's going to be a good test for their program. This could be a good test for the Ohio State program, too, because it's not a full-strength Ohio State program, but it's going to be a representative sample of what you're maybe looking at next year. And this is a legitimate top 10 team. This is not Alabama, but this is a top 10 team, and this is a game that if you win this game, this is a win you're gonna have to work for. And I think you think you're going to have a pretty good 60-minute football game on Friday.
Yeah, and this will be the best offense Ohio State has played, the most aggressive offense they've played. So Ohio State has this tremendous defense, but they've built it on a Big Ten schedule. Mm-hmm. So this will tell us even more about Ohio State's defense as well. So that will do it from Dallas. I want to thank you all for tuning in. Please like this video, hit the thumbs up if you're watching it on YouTube. We would appreciate that. Subscribe if you have not. We would also appreciate that. And of course, if you're listening on your podcast platform of choice, a 5-star rating and review is always welcome. And of course, you can always find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com, where you can become a member and support us if you would like there as well. It helps us do things like this as well. So thank you all for tuning in, and we will talk to you guys later.